Hey guys, tonight, we travel somewhere cold, colder than your bedroom when someone forgets to shut the window in January. You're bundled in furs, trudging through a snow-thick trail that crunches with every step. The wind bites at your cheeks like it holds a personal grudge. The sky, a deep, endless gray that makes you forget what sunlight ever looked like. You're in medieval Scandinavia, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. This is a world where justice doesn't wear a powdered wig. No gavels, no courtrooms with tidy pews. Instead, justice here comes with biting winds, howling wolves, and a jury of neighbors who don't blink when you're sentenced to sit in a frozen stream for lying about your goat. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step through a village where time seems stuck under snow. It's the 1200s, and Norway, Sweden, and Denmark have laws, but they aren't what you'd call gentle. The term frozen justice isn't just poetic, it's painfully literal. Your feet bring you to the edge of the village square. There, a hunched man stands on a stump, arms bound, as a crowd of neighbors watch. The elder of the clan steps forward with a long wooden staff, raising it high before slamming it into the snow. The man on the stump trembles not from cold, but from knowing what comes next. This isn't a court. This is the thing, the Norse public assembly. It's where disputes are aired, wrongdoers judged, and more often than not, punishments delivered with all the mercy of a blizzard. Historians still argue whether the thing was truly democratic, or just a fancy way for the loudest men in the village to bully everyone else. But tonight, you're not debating, you're witnessing. A woman accuses the man of breaking into her smokehouse. He denies it. Someone found footprints in the snow. They match his boots. Case closed. Not quite. You think maybe a fine or some firewood would settle things. But no. The elders mumble in Old Norse, and then someone brings forth a long iron rod glowing faintly red, taken from coals buried deep in a hearth. Trial by ordeal. You're told he'll walk 3 paces with the rod in his bare hands. Then they'll bind his fingers, wrap them tight, and wait 3 days. If the skin festers, guilty. If not, innocent. Spoiler, almost everyone festers. One elder leans toward you and whispers, "The gods don't let the innocent blister." You nod solemnly, pretending that makes sense. Meanwhile, you're wondering if they've considered how infections work. These punishments weren't always about pain, they were about spectacle. Everyone needed to see justice. You didn't just punish someone. You reminded the whole village what not to do. Don't steal, don't lie. Don't touch another man's ale. And definitely don't insult the chieftain's beard. Seriously, someone once got exiled for that. But it wasn't all stumps and iron. Sometimes you'd get creative justice. Let's say your sheep wandered into your neighbor's field. You might have to walk through the village with dung smeared on your boots and a sign around your neck saying, "I can't control my sheep." Humiliating, absolutely. But effective, you bet. No one forgets the poop parade guy. One mainstream historical fact by the 13th century Scandinavian legal codes, like the Frostdathing Law and Gulathing Law, were written down blending pagan customs with Christian morality. They preserved oral traditions, but also introduced new layers of symbolic punishment, where embarrassment mattered just as much as injury. And then there were the weather-based tortures. A thief might be tied outside overnight, not to a post, but to a frozen tree shirtless. The punishment, let nature decide your fate. If you survived the night, maybe the gods were forgiven. If not, well, nature voted guilty. Quirky fringe tidbit. In some Icelandic communities, the worst punishment wasn't death, it was ned. That's when you were turned into a social ghost. People wouldn't look at you, speak to you. You became invisible in the village you grew up in. It's like being blocked by everyone in town, only with more cold stares and less Wi-Fi. And perhaps the most terrifying punishment, outlawry. You hear the word whispered. It doesn't mean going to jail. It means you're cast out. No home, no protection, no right to be avenged if someone murders you. You're officially outside the law, like a horror movie where even the monsters feel bad for you. As your boots crunch through another alley, you spot a small wooden mask nailed to a post, carved roughly with one side smiling and the other side screaming. A reminder. No words. Just emotion burned into wood. You glance back at the villagers still watching that man on the stump. His palms are blistering now, wrapped in linen, his jaw clenched in agony. In a few days, the verdict will be clear, not by logic, but by infection. If you think that sounds unfair, remember, this is a place where fairness comes after frostbite. And somehow, as your eyes close for a moment, the sound of distant wolves howling feels less threatening than the calm with which these people handle pain. You're only one step into this icy world of peculiar justice, and already you're wondering, how many ways can a society hurt you without laying a finger? Turns out a lot. You wake to the clink of metal and the sound of something soft yet undeniably wet being dragged across packed snow. You shuffle out from under a wool blanket someone kindly loaned you last night, and there it is, the scene no villager wants to star in. A man is being led to the center of the village, his hands-bound face already red with shame or windburn. Two elders walk behind him, holding a burlap sack that squishes suspiciously. You catch a whiff. Yep, cow dung, or worse, fermented cod guts. Either way, this is about to get personal. Someone whispers stole from old Sigurd's cattle barn. You raise a brow? Cow theft. Not exactly headline crime. But here in medieval Scandinavia, it's serious business. Cows are currency. Steal a cow and you're not just a thief, you're a financial saboteur, a walking debt crisis. Now here's the kicker you expect, maybe a fine, a stern lecture, maybe the world's angriest cow chase. But no. They sit him on a flat rock tie, his arms behind his back, and bring out a small, wicked-looking blade. The crowd quiets. Then comes the sentence, nefskurdur, nose cutting. Yep, for stealing livestock, you might lose your nose. Not metaphorically, not socially, physically, right off the front of your face. Historians still argue whether the practice was uniform, or selectively enforced. Some legal codes mention it plainly, while others imply it was reserved for repeat offenders or crimes of dishonor. Either way, losing your nose was more than punishment. It was permanent public branding. Because here's the cruel brilliance of it, you can't hide it. There's no medieval plastic surgery, no clever makeup tutorial to contour around the gaping absence where your sniffer used to be. You walk around with that punishment every day. It's your criminal record printed on your face. One man nudges you, muttering, now his wife will have to smell for both of them. You chuckle nervously. The guy beside you doesn't. And as odd as it sounds, nose cutting had a logic. It followed the eye for an eye rhythm of early justice. You take from the community takes from you. You eat a cow, say goodbye to your aesthetic symmetry. And there were options. If the thief had confessed, early offered compensation, and begged mercy before the thing, maybe he'd be spared. Maybe. But pride's a funny thing, especially in a world where honor is bigger than survival. Quirky tidbit. Some Norse poems mock men with missing noses, calling them north wind breathers and half-faced liars. Even medieval playground insults had layers. So not only did you suffer the pain, you also became village entertainment. Forever. The ritual continues. They heat the knife not red hot, mind you, just enough to sterilize. How thoughtful. The elder pauses, offers one last chance to confess and pay restitution, but it's too late. The man shakes his head. Perhaps he still claims innocence, or perhaps in a strange act of defiance, he chooses to take the blade rather than admit to shame. The blade touches skin. You look away. There's a sudden cry, and then it's over. A single piece of flesh is tossed into the snow. A woman gasps. The child giggles, probably too young to understand, or just morbidly curious. A bucket of icy water is splashed across the man's face. He stumbles, eyes wild, breath ragged. He's free now, but marked. He'll never steal again. Not because he's changed, but because everyone will see him coming. And it's not just cow theft. Other body parts had their moment in the punishment spotlight. Fingers for pickpockets, ears for eavesdroppers. Yes, the irony was not lost on anyone. The more visible the crime, the more visible the reminder. And this wasn't unique to Scandinavia. Medieval law across Europe was basically a DIY face sculpting kit for justice. But in the biting Nordic cold, the consequences felt crueler. Infection, frostbite, scar tissue that never healed right. You didn't just lose a nose. You risked your life for that punishment. Historians debate whether the brutality of such punishments was actually a deterrent or just a performance of power. One theory suggests the public spectacle reinforced communal values, creating fear, not just of punishment, but of being the next tale told at supper. You can see it now, neighbors gossiping over dried fish and barley ale. Did you see Olaf's new look? Guess he won't be sniffing around my barn anymore. But there's a deeper, darker layer. Some suggest that such punishments were less about justice and more about control. The ruling class, chieftains, landowners, those with wealth used mutilation to maintain order in a society where law was memory and justice wore wool. And here's the irony: if you stole from the chieftain, your punishment was swift and brutal. But if he took from you, well, good luck with that. You walk away from the scene, stomach slightly unsettled, nose colder than ever. You rub it instinctively, grateful it's still attached. Barely. As you pass a wooden carving outside a longhouse, you notice something odd. A man's face carefully carved, except his nose is missing. You wonder if it's a warning or a self-portrait. Tonight, you learn something that sticks with you in this world. Law isn't blind. It's watching. And it's got a knife in hand. You don't get far before the cold really sets in, the kind that gets under your skin, and then deeper, like it's checking your bones for guilt. The villagers walk briskly, but you're drawn toward a river. It's half frozen, its surface broken only where the ice has been cut deliberately into a sharp, clean channel. You spot a group gathering, hushed but expectant, as if waiting for something sacred or spectacular. This is no fishing trip. In the middle of the crowd, two figures are bound not with ropes, but with layers of wet cloth that freeze tighter the longer they wait. They're accused of theft. Brothers, apparently. One claims innocence, the other too quiet to tell. You blink against the wind as a tall man steps forward. His cloak is decorated with bird bones. He carries no sword, no staff, just a wooden ladle full of water, which he pours gently over the ice hole. Not to melt it, just to make it shine. This is trial by cold water, and you're about to see justice served Nordic style. Here's the method: the accused is lowered into the freezing water. If they sink innocent, if they float guilty, that's it. Doesn't matter if they scream or confess or explain. The water decides, or more precisely, God does through the water. It's not logic, it's ritual. Now let's just say if you happen to be a good swimmer, you're in trouble. Historians still argue whether this practice was inherited from earlier pagan rites or imported with Christian fervor. Some think it blended both traditions, punishment and purification, in a single shivering package. Others believe it was just an incredibly efficient way to let nature do the judging. One thing's clear, it was less about the truth and more about community consensus. No one questioned the river. And yes, before you ask, people died. Drowning was not uncommon, especially if you proved your innocence too well. Others were pulled out just in time, half-frozen teeth clattering so hard they bit their own tongues. The brothers are dragged to the riverbank. Their coats are removed. The wind hits them like a slap. One of them yells, maybe in protest, maybe from panic. Doesn't matter. The ritual has begun. The villagers chant something low and old. A woman clutches a carved amulet, probably Thor or Christ, or maybe both. This is belief. This is law, and it doesn't care if you're cold. One brother is chosen. He's lowered into the hole, slowly held by a rope under his arms. The water looks like it might slice him in half from the shock. His body jerks, breath gone. And then, he sinks. The crowd gasps, not in horror, but in relief. Innocent. The water has spoken. The rope is yanked. Men pull fast, holding him out before his lungs fill. He's coughing, sputtering, probably half-conscious. They wrap him in furs, muttering prayers. He'll live barely. Now the second brother. The rope slips beneath his shoulders. He's pale shaking, but doesn't resist. Down he goes. He bobs. Just once. Then, he floats. The crowd falls silent. The water, smug and silent, has judged. Guilty. They haul him out, not gently. He won't be wrapped in furs. No warm fire. Instead, he's shackled to a post by the river's edge, left to dry out in the wind. That is if he doesn't freeze first. Quirky detail. In some villages, floating was thought to indicate demonic buoyancy. Yes, really. Guilt made you lighter, apparently. There's even record of a man who tied rocks to his belt just to sink on a purpose and prove innocence. It worked, sort of. He was cleared. But he also couldn't walk for weeks. And if this sounds familiar, it should. Witch trials across Europe often used a version of this same test. But Scandinavia added its own flavor. The ritual was sometimes accompanied by a goat sacrifice. Because nothing says justice like wet socks and an unlucky goat. You shiver watching the guilty brother's skin turn blotchy. You try not to think about his lungs or his frozen clothes or what comes next. Because even if the water convicted him, the thing still decides how he'll be punished. And if you remember last night's snow story, you know it won't be fun. You ask a bystander, what if someone refuses the water test? The woman shrugs. Then they admit guilt. In this world, refusing nature's trial is confession. No debate, just surrender. This is the part where your modern brain wants to protest. What about evidence? What about logic? But in this world, the water is sacred. It reflects your soul. It punishes lies and purifies truth. Or so they believe. And if the accused survives, even if deemed guilty, they may get off easier than expected. Some are sentenced to labor or exile, or oddly specific, counting the village's fish stock each morning. Others are branded or humiliated, like being forced to sing bad poetry outside the chieftain's longhouse. Loudly, in the rain. You glance again at the convicted brother, lips trembling. One of the elders walks over and silently places a rock in front of him. A symbolic stone of judgment. In some areas, they called it the sorrow stone. He must carry it back to the thing, with bare hands. And if he drops it, the punishment doubles. You don't stay to watch. Some things are better left unseen. Instead, you walk along the icy path, back toward the center of the village. Your boots slip once or twice, and each time you imagine what it'd be like to fall into a river like that. Would you float? Would you sink? Would you even want to know? By the time you reach the warmth of a crackling fire pit, your toes are numb, your breath fogs like smoke, and the laws of this land have never felt colder. You're warming your hands by a low fire when a strange sound rings through the village square. Clink, clank, cling, cling. It's not metal against stone or the clatter of armor. It's more rhythmic, annoying even. You follow the noise and spot the source, immediately a man with a bell strapped to his head. Not in his hands, not around his neck, on his head. He walks stiffly, shoulders hunched, as if each step drains a year from his life. And dangling from either side of his pointed hat are small bronze bells jingling with every miserable step. This is the bell hat punishment. You blink, not sure whether to laugh or feel bad. Everyone else seems to be doing both. A group of children jog alongside him, giggling and mimicking his exaggerated, shameful gait. He doesn't react. He's not allowed to. Part of the sentence. One local leans toward you, grinning. He insulted the miller's wife. Loudly, while drunk. You nod. That tracks. You expect some kind of lashing or fine, but no. The law here thrives on shame. And nothing says shame quite like parading through your entire village wearing a hat that screams, "Look at me, I messed up." Now let's be clear, this wasn't a one-size-fits-all accessory. The hat changed depending on the crime. Sometimes it was oversized and ridiculous, like something out of a twisted circus. Other times it was tall and narrow, forcing the wearer to bow every time they entered a doorway. A constant, humbling inconvenience. Historians still argue whether this punishment came from clerical traditions or if it evolved organically in Scandinavian custom. Some say it mimicked the bishop's mitre and mockery. Others believe it was borrowed from Germanic shame rituals. Either way, the message was loud and jingly. And the bells weren't just for noise, they were symbols. The sound followed the offender everywhere, reminding villagers of his crime. You couldn't hide. You couldn't sneak. You were your own alarm system, quirky detail. In some communities, the bell hat included tiny mirrors sewn into the fabric. The idea was that the offender would see themselves from all angles, literally reflecting on their behavior. Talk about passive-aggressive fashion. The man stops periodically as instructed and reads aloud a written confession nailed to a wooden plank strapped to his chest. It says something like, "I dishonored good people with slanderous speech. May this shame cleanse my tongue." He mumbles the words, eyes on the snow. He's clearly said them a dozen times already. The crowd half listens. This isn't their first bell hat parade. But to him, every step is a reminder. Every jingle, a public scolding. The punishment typically lasted a day, maybe two. Enough to humiliate, not destroy. Unless, of course, the offender resisted. Then the hat got heavier. More bells, maybe a tail. And don't laugh, yes, sometimes they added a fake tail, because nothing says I was rude at a wedding like being made to look like a foolish donkey. You might think this sounds kinder than having your nose cut off. And sure, physically it's less damaging. But emotionally, socially devastating. Because here reputation is everything. Lose a hand and people might still trade with you. Wear the bell hat and your neighbors will whisper behind their mittens for seasons to come. And just when you think you've seen enough, the crowd parts. A second offender enters wearing a hat twice as tall, painted with bright red swirls and feathers you don't even ask. You just read the sign on his chest. I passed wind in the chapel, loudly, more than once. Ah, so we're dealing with a repeat offender. Even in a society built on survival and honor, they made room for humor. Low crimes deserved loud punishments. Why fine someone when you can turn them into a walking joke? The man with the feathers takes his punishment better than the first. He even waves. The children cheer. One throws him a crust of bread, which he catches with a slight bow. He's owning it. Smart move. In some regions, offenders could end their shame walk early by making the crowd laugh. If the punishment was about communal healing, then humor counted. A sincere apology and a ridiculous hat dance that might shave an hour off your sentence. But if you sulked, refused to walk, tried to hide, well then the elders might assign a second day, or make you sing, publicly, loudly. And no one wants to hear medieval renditions of love ballads from someone wearing bells and fake ears. Mainstream historical fact, Scandinavian legal codes like the Jyske Love Law of Jutland 1241 include detailed provisions for non-lethal punishments. Shame-based penalties were central to preserving order in smaller communities where execution or exile would have been too costly or too cruel for minor missteps. These punishments were theatrical, yes, but also practical. You return to the fire pit, the echo of jingling bells still in your ears. You think about how the sound follows the guilty even after the hat comes off. The bells fade, but the memory, that rings forever. A local leans toward you and whispers, "He'll never live it down, you know." You nod, watching as the man disappears down the snowy path. No scars, no blood. But somehow, it still hurts. The wind howls low as you step beyond the village's wooden perimeter, past crooked fences, and toward the tree line where the land opens up to nothing. No shelter, no market. Just snow sky and silence that stretches on forever. You're not out here for a nature walk. You're following a man who's just been declared Utleg Darmader, an outlaw. No bell hat, no water trials, no nose cutting this time. His punishment is harsher than all of them put together exile. And in this corner of medieval Scandinavia, exile doesn't mean moving to another village. It means being cut off from humanity itself. You've heard the word whispered outlawed. But now you're seeing it for what it really is. Social death. Once the thing that great open-air assembly of villagers and elders declares you an outlaw, you're no longer protected by law. Anyone can kill you. Anyone. No trial, no consequence. In fact, there's sometimes a reward. And if they don't kill you, the wild might. Outlawry was reserved for serious crimes. Murder, repeated theft, betrayal. Crimes that fractured trust in ways no public shaming could patch. But here's the twisted detail. Sometimes you didn't even have to commit the crime yourself. If you harbored a criminal or refused to testify or angered the wrong chieftain, you might find yourself cast out just the same. Historians still argue whether outlawry was intended more as a death sentence or as a test of redemption. Some see it as an opportunity for criminals to prove their worth through years of suffering and survival. Others believe it was simply a convenient way to erase problems without swinging an axe. You watch as the man, young maybe 30, takes nothing but a fur cloak, a satchel of dried fish, and a dull knife. The elders don't even look at him. His wife isn't here. Maybe she couldn't watch. Maybe she wasn't allowed. And no one walks him out. That's part of the punishment, too. Once you're outlawed, you are no longer a person. No eye contact, no help, no final words. You might think this was rare. It wasn't. Outlawry was a backbone of medieval Scandinavian justice. Even the legendary Grettir the Strong, a saga hero, was outlawed. His tale is one of strength, stubbornness, and ultimately tragedy, because no matter how noble you think you are, the wild doesn't care. And it is wild out here. Snow up to your calves, wind sharp enough to cut, forests so dense you'd get lost 5 steps in, and wolves. Not poetic, symbolic wolves, real ones. With teeth and hunger and no interest in whether your punishment was fair. The man walks steadily. He doesn't turn back. He can't. Looking back is weakness. It's an invitation for one of the villagers to put an arrow between your shoulder blades. But here's the thing, he won't always be outlawed. In many cases, the exile had a time limit. 3 winters. 7 in more serious cases. If you survived and returned, there was a chance the thing would welcome you back. Scarred, yes. Different, definitely. But alive. Surviving outlawry required cunning. Friends who risked helping you in secret. A hidden shelter, a bit of luck, a lot of frostbite. And perhaps most importantly, reputation. If people still remembered you as someone with honor, someone who was wronged, then your return might even become a kind of legend. But don't get hopeful. Quirky detail. In some places, to symbolize the stripping of rights, the outlaw's shadow was considered cursed. If your shadow touched a fire, it was said to make the flames sputter and die. Children were told not to step in it. Superstitious, sure. But that's how deep outlawry could have turned you into myth before you even left. You sit on a stone near the edge of the forest as the man disappears into the trees. The silence grows. Even the birds seem to avoid this path. One elder finally speaks. He has 7 winters. Then, we shall see. The villagers nod. No one smiles. This isn't revenge. It's ritual. A cold, calculated reset of the social order. They don't hate him, but they cannot allow what he did, whatever it was, to stain the fragile fabric of their community. You try to imagine it. 7 years alone, scavenging, sleeping under snow-draped branches, fending off beasts, human and not. And every night, wondering if anyone even remembers your name. But some do come back. A saga tells of one outlaw who returned not just forgiven, but celebrated. He saved the village from raiders using the skills he'd learned in exile. They built him a hall and named their sons after him. So there is hope. But it's hope forged in hardship. Mainstream historical fact. The Icelandic Gragas laws laid out precise rules for outlawry, distinguishing between full outlawry, permanent, and lesser outlawry, temporary exile. In either case, it was serious, so serious, that a person declared outlaw had their property seized, their name cursed, and their family shamed. And sometimes they didn't even make it out of the village. A few steps into exile, and an arrow finds your back. Or a rival waits at the edge of the woods, eager to collect your bounty. In some ways, outlawry was like opening a gate and saying you're free to go, if you can. You head back toward the firelight of the village wind, whistling in your ears. The elder who spoke earlier places a stone beside the trail, a marker, a reminder. You pause and place your hand on the cold surface. It's smooth, almost polished, as if worn down by stories. You don't know the outlaw's name. But for the rest of the night, you wonder if he'll make it, if you'll see him again, and what kind of man he'll be when, or if he returns. Because here in the icy law of this land, being cast out isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of your reckoning. Snow falls thicker now. The sky hangs low like a heavy wool blanket ready to drop. You follow a crooked path back toward the heart of the village, where another crowd is forming, different this time. Quieter. No jeering. No jingling bell hats. Just the steady clinking of chainmail and the low hum of anticipation. A duel is about to begin. Two men stand opposite each other in a clearing flattened by boots and tension. They're not young. One is gray-bearded with shoulders like boulders. The other lean, sinewy, and younger, but you can see the nervous twitch in his hand. It's not fear of fighting. It's fear of what the fight represents. Because here in medieval Scandinavia, duels weren't just physical contests. They were legal instruments. You've stepped into a system where honor could be defended with a blade. It's called the holmgang, a sanctioned duel that wasn't outlaw behavior, but a form of litigation. A way to settle disputes when witnesses failed or words rang hollow. You steal my land, I challenge you. You dishonor my name, I challenge you. You walk by my longhouse, look at my goat funny, and now my goat refuses to milk. Well, you get the idea. And once a holmgang challenge is issued, refusal is not an option. Declining means guilt. You might as well tattoo coward and thief across your forehead, assuming your forehead survives the insult. The rules are strict, surprisingly so. A designated patch of land is prepared, sometimes marked with hazel rods. You step inside, weapons ready. Step outside the boundary, you lose. Drop your weapon, you lose. Die well. Technically, you win nothing but, at least your family might keep the farm. Historians still argue whether holmgangs were true tests of honor or just legal violence wrapped in ritual. Some see them as tools of justice in a system lacking evidence. Others believe they were loopholes for the strong to silence the clever. Today's dispute, land inheritance. The older man claims his brother cheated him of his rightful field. The younger says the claim is a lie, crafted out of jealousy. No one can prove anything, no documents, just family tension and a very long memory. So now they fight. Quirky detail. Some holmgangs involved substitute champions. If you were old, sick, or just bad with a sword, you could hire someone to duel for you. Yes, medieval legal mercenaries. There are records of men making full-time careers out of being someone else's grudge. But not today. These two chose to settle it themselves. The chieftain steps forward and raises a staff. The duel begins with a prayer, sometimes to Odin, sometimes to Christ, depending on how mixed your theological calendar is. Then the blades clash. It's not elegant. No swirling cloaks or choreographed swings. This is muddy, grunting, snow-drenched brutality. The crowd watches silently. They've seen worse. You haven't. Each strike is heavy, measured. They're not trying to impress. They're trying to end it. Minutes pass. You notice one of them limping. Blood spatters the snow. A sword clatters. The younger man stumbles, and that's all the older one needs. A sharp kick, then steel to throat. But he stops. He can kill, but he chooses not to. Instead, he pulls back, throws the sword to the side, and offers a hand. A gasp moves through the crowd like wind through dry grass. This is rare. He's just won not only the fight, but the higher ground. Mainstream historical fact. By the late 11th century, holmgangs were outlawed in most parts of Scandinavia. The Christian influence spread, and dueling was increasingly seen as barbaric and unjust. But before that, holmgangs were respected, even sacred. Your reputation often depended on whether you stood when called. The defeated man accepts the hand. They speak softly, too softly to hear. A nod, a breath. Then they part. The crowd murmurs, not in disappointment, but awe. A duel that ends in mercy carries more weight than one ending in blood. You linger after everyone else leaves. The patch of flattened snow is now streaked with red, but it feels peaceful, settled. Later, an elder tells you of the strangest holmgang he ever saw. Two women both claiming ownership of the same goat. Instead of swords, they fought with thick wooden ladles. 3 rounds. Winner kept the goat. The loser had to feed it for a year. Justice is weird sometimes. You think about how different this feels from modern courtrooms. There's no judge in a robe, no lawyers. Just 2 people willing to fight for truth, or at least their version of it. It's terrifying. It's primal. But in a world where memory is law and reputation is life, sometimes you settle things not with evidence, but with edge. As you walk back to the village, snow crunching underfoot, you realize that justice here isn't about fairness. It's about willingness. Are you willing to suffer to bleed, to stand if not the law moves on without you? By now, the rhythm of this village is sinking into your bones. Justice here doesn't rest in books or scrolls. It breathes in the cold wind, in watchful eyes, and in rituals so old they don't need explaining. You only need to feel them. And you feel it now as you walk toward a wide circle of standing stones. This is the Thing Assembly. You've heard the term whispered, maybe thought it was just a meeting or council. But standing here, you realize it's so much more. It's the spine of the entire legal system, a parliament, a courtroom, a town square, and a judgment day, all rolled into one frosty clearing. Villagers are already gathering, bundled in thick cloaks, stamping snow from their boots. At the center of the circle, raised slightly on a flat stone slab, sits the law speaker. He doesn't carry a gavel or a pen. He carries bones, specifically sheep bones, polished smooth from generations of hands. These aren't magical trinkets, though they feel magical. They're used to count votes, to mark consensus, to pass judgments when words are no longer enough. And make no mistake, this is democracy, but not the kind that comes with stickers and ballot boxes. This is about voice and presence. If you want to influence the law, you show up. If you want justice, you make your case in front of your community, your enemies, your gods. The law speaker begins by reciting reciting entire sections of law from memory. No reading, no notes, just verse after verse, carved into the minds of those chosen to speak for order. Mainstream historical fact. In societies like Iceland during the 10th and 11th centuries, law speakers held office at gatherings like the Althing, the National Assembly. Their role was crucial, especially when laws weren't yet written down. They preserved justice by voice alone. The man beside you whispers, he's been law speaker for 15 winters. Misses nothing, forgets no names. You believe it. A case is called land boundary dispute, not between warriors, but 2 aging farmers. You expect fire and fury, but instead, it's calm, methodical, like 2 chess players arguing over a pawn. They lay down sheep bones, literally. The bones are tokens, each one representing an acre, a promise, or a breach. The law speaker asks questions. He's not trying to catch them in a lie. He's trying to catch the truth hiding between their words. At one point he pauses and looks to the sky. It starts snowing. He nods. That's not metaphor. That's timing. You realize how deeply nature and law are entwined here. A storm might delay a trial. A wolf sighting near someone's pasture might sway a ruling. Justice doesn't just happen in the land, it happens with it. Quirky detail. Sometimes verdicts weren't passed down by humans at all, but by chance. If the Thing Assembly couldn't reach agreement, they might settle it by throwing carved bones like dice or casting lots. Not out of laziness, but because fate, divine or otherwise, was considered a valid voice in the legal process. One farmer wins. The other nods, mutters something about checking fences, and walks away. No shouting, no duel. Just resolution. You're about to leave when something shifts. The law speaker pulls out a second pouch. Smaller bones this time. And now the tone changes. This case, it's serious. The accused steps forward. A woman. She's tall, older, wrapped in a raven feather cloak. You can tell she carries a name. Maybe power. Maybe fear. She's accused of breaking a burial taboo, entering a grave mound after dark. No one explains why she did it. No one dares ask. The thing doesn't debate guilt. The facts are clear. The question is punishment. And that's where it gets symbolic. The law speaker holds up a single sheep bone, scorched black. This, he says, represents silence disturbed, peace shattered. It's decided she must bring balance, not with gold, not with labor, with a story. Her punishment is to recite every third night the tale of the disturbed spirit until the spring thaw. Publicly, in front of children. A ghost story wrapped in truth told until fear becomes learning. Historians still argue whether punishments like this were exceptions or remnants of older oral justice traditions. Some think it was part of a healing process, using narrative to stitch social wounds. Others believe it was a clever way to shame without blood. Either way, it's strangely beautiful. A punishment that echoes backward, teaching others, reminding them not just what happened, but why it mattered. You stay until the crowd thins, the law speaker's voice growing hoarse. The bones are packed away gently into worn leather pouches. Someone brings him mead. He drinks, nods, and disappears into the dusk. The thing is over. No one applauds. No one cheers. But something feels settled, like a knot loosened just enough to breathe again. As you walk away from the stone circle, you feel the quiet weight of justice done not perfectly, not coldly, but in a rhythm older than the village itself. And you wonder what modern courts might look like. If they listen to bones, you've barely thawed your fingers from the thing assembly before the village draws you into something more intimate and unsettling. This time, it's not about stolen land, or goat disputes, or even a drunken insult to the blacksmith's beard. This time, it's about truth. Or more precisely, the price of distorting it. A boy has accused his older cousin of spreading false rumors, ugly ones, the kind that cling to a person long after the snow melts. He claims it's all lies. The cousin insists it's the truth. Now, in a place where reputations are carved deeper than gravestones, this is no small quarrel. Lies rot the root of any community. Which means tonight, you get to witness one of the most feared punishments in the village tongue-cutting. You swallow hard, and instinctively, your hand moves to your own mouth. The elders aren't hasty with this one. This isn't a routine humiliation or a bit of public frostbite. Cutting out a tongue is serious. It's permanent. It's the medieval equivalent of revoking your Twitter account with pliers. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread practice or a punishment reserved for the worst kinds of liars, repeat offenders, betrayers, or those who endangered others through deceit. Some sources mention symbolic tongue cutting, like nicking the side of the mouth or marking the tongue with a burn, while others go full snip. Tonight, full snip. The accused is a man in his 20s, cocky at first glance. But now he's silent, trembling. And when he's asked one final time, "Did you lie?" he doesn't answer. That's not helpful. So they proceed. There's a wooden block smooth and polished, from use not for hands, but chins. The law speaker holds the knife. Not a weapon, not jagged, but clean, curved slightly. Surgical in its own barbaric way. The law speaker speaks not just to the man, but to everyone. Words are sacred. When twisted, they poison water and mind alike. Let none forget this. Then gently, almost respectfully, he instructs the accused to place his chin down. He does. You look away. The sound isn't what you expected. It's soft, almost like slicing fruit. But the silence that follows, that's what stays with you. The man crumples, clutching his mouth, eyes wide. A groan escapes, wet and wordless. They bind his jaw with linen and herbs. He won't die, but he'll never speak the same again. That's the punishment. Not pain, not even blood. Silence. Because in this world, lying isn't just immoral, it's corrosive. It weakens the very thing that keeps people alive, trust. Mainstream historical fact. The Gragas law code of medieval Iceland held truth in such high regard that entire cases could hinge on a person's known honesty. Repeat, slanderers lost all legal standing, meaning they couldn't testify, accuse, or defend. You became invisible in court and in life. And this punishment wasn't just for words. Deceit in contracts, false oaths, even manipulating someone into breaking a fast could lead to consequences like this. There's a chilling record of a merchant whose tongue was branded after he tricked villagers with fake silver coins. Quirky tidbit. In one saga, a woman who lied about her neighbor's affair was sentenced not to tongue cutting, but to wearing a carved wooden tongue tied to her own, yes, tied with a thin leather strap. Every time she spoke, it slapped her chin. That's one way to keep your gossip in check. Tonight, however, there's no such creativity. The man sits near the fire, wrapped in furs, drooling slightly. No one mocks him. No one celebrates. This isn't a punishment for the crowd. It's a quiet warning. And oddly, it works. You notice the way people speak now. Carefully, thoughtfully. No one raises their voice or flings casual accusations. It's like every word has doubled in weight. You overhear a child whisper to his sister, "Don't lie, or your tongue will end up in the snow." You believe him. Later, someone tells you of a tale possibly true of a man who voluntarily offered his tongue when caught lying. No struggle, no protest, just laid it out like tribute. And in return, they spared him. Gave him a scar instead, a second chance. Because sometimes admitting guilt is worth more than denying it to the bitter end. You think back to your own world. The way lies move fast, online, on screens, with likes and shares and angry comments, and how rarely anyone ever pays for them. Here, you pay. You stay silent for a while, walking slowly through the quiet village. Even the dogs seem hushed tonight, as if honoring the silence that's just been earned. And as the stars prick through the cloudy sky, you understand something odd. There's a strange dignity to this kind of justice. Brutal, yes. Primitive, perhaps, but honest. And honesty in this cold world is the only warmth some people have left. A strange wind curls through the forest edge as you wake to the low murmur of voices, not the ordinary bustle of morning chores, but hushed, urgent tones that ripple through the village like the warning call of a bird. Something's happened. Or maybe something strange has happened. You follow the sound and it leads you toward the edge of the woods, where superstition runs thicker than snowdrifts. A boy no more than 10 stands trembling beside his father. They're speaking to the law speaker, who seems less like a judge this morning and more like a weary exorcist. The boy claims he was lured into the woods by a troll, not the cute storybook kind, the ancient, unpredictable kind. He says the troll made him steal bread from the village oven. The people want to punish the boy. The father begs for mercy, and now the law speaker must decide. Welcome to the strange gray area of medieval Scandinavian law, where troll curses and forest spirits blur the line between guilt and innocence. You'd think such claims would be laughed off, but no, here supernatural interference is taken seriously. Not necessarily because everyone believes the trolls are real, but because they might be. And more importantly, because pretending they're not might invite worse. So begins one of the oddest, eeriest forms of justice, the loophole of the curse. Historians still debate how widespread belief in legal troll interference really was. Some argue these cases were mostly symbolic rituals used to explain behavior that didn't make sense. Others insist they reflect a genuine effort to include the supernatural as part of the legal process, a kind of early acknowledgement of mental distress, misfortune, or manipulation by forces outside one's control. The law speaker doesn't accuse the boy. Instead, he asks questions: where exactly did he meet the troll? What did it look like? What did it say? The boy answers clearly, vividly, too vividly. Eyes wide, breathing fast. He describes long ears, bark-like skin, and a voice that came from the ground itself. Everyone leans in. Even the chickens seem to stop scratching the dirt. The law speaker pulls a sprig of dried juniper from a pouch at his side. He burns it in a small bowl, lets the smoke drift toward the boy's face. This isn't a spell, it's a test. If the child flinches or faints, it might indicate possession, or dishonesty, or both. He holds steady. So a verdict: the boy will not be punished. But the bread he stole must be returned not as food, but as offering. He's instructed to bake another loaf, shape it like the face he saw in the woods, then carry it into the forest, to the spot where he met the troll, and leave it there with a whisper: here is your share. Now leave me be. You blink. That's the sentence. Yes. Because sometimes the goal of justice here isn't punishment, it's balance. Quirky tidbit. In northern Sweden, there's record of a man who swore his axe was stolen by a spirit who lived in a tree stump. The local assembly didn't charge him with false reporting. Instead, they moved the thing meeting away from the stump for the season so as not to offend the being. You're beginning to understand that the law here isn't just written by humans. It's shaped by land myth fear and respect for what you cannot see. In these rare cases, punishment becomes ritual. And that ritual serves more than justice. It keeps the community tethered to something older than law, something deeper than fairness. Mainstream historical fact. While official legal codes like the Frost Athing or Gulathing didn't mention trolls or elves explicitly, oral traditions and local laws often blurred into superstition. Some laws included bans on cedar, a kind of sorcery that could cause illness, misfortune, or mind-altering effects. Whether real or not, the law acknowledged their perceived power. You watch as the boy and his father walk back toward the village ovens. No punishment, no exile, no bell hat. Just flour and fear and an invisible line drawn in the woods. Later that evening, a small procession follows them just to observe. The bread, shaped into something vaguely humanoid, is placed in a hollow at the base of a twisted tree. The boy says his line, and then they walk back without turning around. You ask someone, what if there was no troll? The answer comes quickly, without hesitation. Then the forest knows he tried to make peace. And that's enough. You don't know whether to smile or shiver. Because this system of justice, so often brutal, cold, and unapologetic, still makes room for the unexplainable. It's not about whether trolls are real. It's about whether people believe they are, and how belief can shape behavior more powerfully than any law ever could. That night, as you curl up by the hearth, you glance once toward the dark edge of the woods. You don't see anything, but still you nod, just in case. You're learning the rules of this land, and one of them is this: always leave room for mystery. Morning creaks in slowly dragging sunbeams across the village rooftops. You hear the usual crackle of hearths and the scrape of wooden spoons against bowls, but also something different. A voice shouting, sharp, panicked. You step outside and catch sight of a scrawny man being dragged by two others toward the center of the square. He's shouting something about hunger, about feeding his children. One of the villagers spits near his boots and mutters, "We all have children." Turns out the man was caught stealing. Not a weapon, not even coin, just bread. A single round barley loaf from the baker's window. Still warm when they found it under his cloak. In your time, this might be a petty crime, maybe a fine, a warning. But here in this land where winter stretches longer than memory and every bite is hard-won bread theft is serious business. You don't just take food, you threaten survival. You brace for a whipping, or perhaps exile if the elders are feeling dramatic. But no, the punishment they choose is quieter and far more lasting. Branding. A curved iron rod is pulled from the baker's hearth. Its end is shaped into a rune, a simple mark. Not decorative, not symbolic. It means thief. You feel your stomach turn as the elders announce it. The man pleads, says he'll repay, says he'll do labor for weeks. But the law here isn't just about repayment. It's about reminder. Historians still argue whether such branding was common or reserved for repeat offenders. Some sources suggest it was more symbolic, a mark on clothing or a colored patch sewn into a tunic. Others confirm that in cases of food theft, especially during harsh winters, flesh branding was indeed used, often on the forehead or forearm. This time, the forearm, just below the elbow, a place you can't easily cover unless you never roll up your sleeves again. The man is held down. The hot iron sizzles as it touches skin, and a thick, low groan spills out of his chest. No screaming, no flailing, no, just pain swallowed deep. When it's done, the smell of burned flesh drifts on the morning air. Someone hands him a cloth and some snow. No sympathy, no ceremony. He stands shaking, face pale. And he walks through the center of town, back to his hut where the door may or may not open for him again. Because the brand is not just punishment, it's permanent social status. You're not the man who was hungry, you're the thief. And that never fades, especially when the mark is visible every time you offer a handshake, pass a bowl, or reach into your own pocket. Quirky detail. In some villages, branded criminals were required to greet others with their branded arm, raised like a reverse salute so no one ever forgot. If they covered it up, that was a new crime. Another brand. And yes, there are records of men bearing 2, 3, even 4 separate marks down a single limb. You hear a boy nearby ask his mother, "What if he was just really hungry?" The mother doesn't answer, but her lips tighten. Because it's not that people here lack compassion. It's that compassion has to compete with precedent. If he gets away with it, then next week someone else might try. Then the baker locks his window. Then the bread stops coming. Then the village suffers. So the law acts not to heal the hungry, but to deter the desperate. Mainstream historical fact. In 13th century Scandinavian law codes, particularly in Norway's Landslov 1274 theft, was divided by severity. Stealing from necessity was sometimes judged more lightly, but that mercy depended entirely on the victim's standing and the village's mood. In lean seasons, a stolen loaf could weigh heavier than a stolen sword. You pause at the baker's stall later that afternoon. The window is open again, but the loaves now sit slightly further back. A small change, but you notice it. The baker doesn't speak, but he nods once, almost imperceptibly. When he sees you glance at the hearth irons, you realize the law here isn't always loud. Sometimes it leaves its message in skin and silence. Later that night, you see the man again. He's sitting by the edge of the stream, clutching his branded arm. A child, his maybe, sits beside him, offering him a bit of dried fish. He takes it with his left hand, always now with the left. Because the right carries a memory he'll never wash off. And you wonder, did justice truly serve today, or just maintain its shape? But here's the thing about this place. Justice doesn't need to be kind. It just needs to be seen. You wake in the middle of the night to shouting. Not angry shouting, not fearful, just loud. You throw on a cloak, stumble out into the half-light of a Scandinavian moon, and follow the noise. What you find stops you cold. A man naked from the waist up is sewn into a massive bearskin. It clings to his body like wet leather rough stitching, pulling it tight across his shoulders, chest, and back. He stumbles through the village, roaring, howling, and swiping at the air with awkward, fur-covered limbs. You're about to ask, what in Thor's name is going on, when a woman next to you says almost too casually, he tried to cheat during Yule dice games, claimed the gods spoke to him. Right, of course. That old crime, the punishment, the bearskin walk. It's both hilarious and horrifying. He looks like a child's drawing of a monster brought to life, snout drooping over his face paws, dragging behind like awkward slippers. But it's no comedy for him. This isn't just for laughs. It's public humiliation fused with symbolic punishment, and tonight the whole village watches. Some chuckle, some shake their heads. A few elders stand at a distance, arms crossed, not amused, but satisfied. Justice is served. Sort of. Historians still argue whether punishments like these were actual law or more of a community-imposed spectacle. There's little direct mention of bearskin sewing in the legal codes, but folklore across Sweden and Norway makes frequent reference to criminals being turned into beasts, especially those who claim divine insight they didn't have. Because here's the twist: in a world that walks a thin line between sacred and scam, pretending to commune with the gods is a very big deal. This man apparently had tried to influence a Yule feast's outcome by claiming Odin had blessed his hand during a dice game. Several villagers lost food coin and patience. So now he's wearing the very symbol of unearned power, the bear. In Norse mythology, the bear isn't just an animal. It's a symbol of ferocity, cunning, and spiritual might. Warriors aspired to bear strength, and berserkers literally took the name from berserker, bear shirt. So to sew someone into a bear hide, it's mockery. It's calling them a fraud, a beast without wisdom, quirky tidbit. In some rural areas, offenders weren't just dressed as animals, as they had to act the part. If you were in a bearskin, you roared at each doorstep. If you were in goat skin, you butted wooden poles or scratched at the earth. If your performance was unconvincing, you had to do it again the next day. This man is giving it everything. He bellows, he rolls, he chases chickens. At one point, he accidentally bowls over a cart of turnips. The crowd laughs, but you can see his face just barely beneath the mask. His eyes are full of shame, because that's the point. This isn't about physical pain. It's about stripping pride, layer by layer, until all that remains is humility. Mainstream historical fact, Scandinavian law codes often punished fraud, not just financially, but publicly. A man who faked divine visions could be fined and whipped, especially if he used his lie to gain food or avoid military service. But in smaller villages, without formal courts, ritualized humiliation like this filled the gap communal justice made unforgettable. You ask, how long does he have to do this? The woman shrugs. Until dawn, or until he weeps loud enough. You blink. That's the rule. She nods. If he breaks down in front of 3 elders, they can choose to cut the stitching and let him out. If he holds it in, he keeps going. And there's something oddly poetic about that. A punishment measured not in hours, but in emotional surrender. He trips again, this time near the well. A child runs over and pokes the bear's snout with a stick. A soft moan echoes from inside. Someone whispers, "He'll cry soon." When it finally happens, it's not theatrical. Just a choked sob muffled by fur. He collapses near the fire pit, paw, limbs twisted awkwardly. 3 elders step forward. They say nothing. They just begin to cut the threads. One by one, the bare hide falls away, revealing bruises, scratches, and a face no longer defiant. He doesn't speak. He just nods once slowly and walks home shirtless in the frost. No applause, no forgiveness, but maybe a second chance. You sit by the fire after he's gone, the smell of smoked fur still in the air. You wonder what it must feel like to be made an animal, so you remember you're human. Because that's what these punishments are about again and again. Not pain for its own sake, but a lesson etched into memory, body, and pride. Tonight you saw a man become a beast and walk back out the other side. And maybe in this strange, snowy world of symbolic scars, that's the most honest kind of justice there is. The sun barely peeks over the snow-dusted rooftops before you hear it, the steady beat of drums. Not war drums, not festival drums, execution drums. You follow the sound, your breath puffing clouds into the crisp morning air, and arrive at the far edge of the village square. A wooden platform has been erected overnight. The structure is simple, just tall enough to command attention. At its center stands a tall frame with a thick rope. And behind it, a man sits calmly on a low stool, chewing what looks like dried birch bark. You're told he's the executioner. He doesn't wear black. He doesn't hide his face. He's just there. Another cog in the legal machine. You're not the only one watching. The entire village gathers. Children on shoulders, elders leaning on carved walking sticks. A group of women carry small loaves of bread wrapped in linen, funeral bread, they call it, offered not for the dead, but for the living as a kind of karmic insurance policy. And then the accused arrives. He walks. No dragging, no kicking, just calm, measured steps. A rope around his wrists, but no one pulls it taut. You lean closer and ask someone, what did he do? They answer simply, murdered a traveler. Lied about it for 3 months. There it is again, the double crime. Killing is one thing, but lying about it afterward. That's what tips the scales toward execution. Because in this land, death is not the default sentence. It's the last resort. When exile, shame, or blood compensation can't balance the books, only then do the drums begin. Historians still argue how often executions were truly carried out. Some believe they were rare and reserved only for crimes that threatened the social fabric: murder, treason, repeated oath-breaking. Others suggest they were more common but deeply ritualized, designed not just to punish, but to teach. And that's the feeling you get now watching as the man is helped up the stairs to the platform. This isn't a scene of rage. No jeering crowd. No spitting. Just silence. Heavy, respectful, ominous. Then the executioner speaks. Not to the condemned, but to everyone else. Let this be the last rope tied this season. May no other throat know its itch. That line has probably been said 1,000 times. The rope is placed. The platform's lever, a crude wooden pin, is pulled. And then, nothing. Because the man didn't drop. The rope snapped. A gasp rolls through the crowd like thunder down a mountain. Now here's where things get interesting. You assume they'll fix the rope and try again. But no. The elders step forward. They murmur. One checks the rope. Another checks the condemned man, who's now sitting up, dazed, blinking. The law speaker raises a hand. Silence. Then the verdict: the gods have intervened. His life is spared, but he shall carry the death mark. You look around confused. Someone explains, when the rope fails, it's a sign. The gods or fate refuse the execution, but he must still be punished. So instead of death, he is tattooed not with ink, but with a burn mark, a coiled brand placed at the base of the neck, shaped like a noose. It's called the Nattmal rune, the midnight mark. Everyone will know he's a man who stood at death's door and came back marked. Quirky detail. In some regions, a failed execution meant the criminal had to dance before being released. Not in joy, in penance. A slow ritualized movement, arms, raised legs heavy, circling the gallows 3 times, chanting lines from a local prayer. Here, no dance, just the burn. And while it spares his life, the consequences are lifelong. He can't speak at the thing. He can't own land. His children will inherit his status unless they marry into another clan. He's not dead, but he's not exactly alive in the eyes of the law either. Mainstream historical fact, Scandinavian justice often allowed for weregild, a blood price paid to the victim's family. But in cases where that wasn't possible, like when the family refused or the crime was deemed unforgivable, execution was permitted, often via hanging or beheading. Yet, as records show, even these events were communal experiences, meant to restore balance, not indulge revenge. As the crowd disperses, you watch the man still trembling led away. His hands are no longer bound, but his eyes hold a strange mixture of relief and regret. You pass the executioner on your way back to the fire pit. He's sharpening the blade of a wood axe, not for execution, just for kindling. But still you wonder. You ask, did you know the rope would break? He looks up, meets your gaze, and says simply, I tie every knot the same. But the gods don't always want the knot. You don't know if he believes that, or if he wants you to believe it. Either way, it's strangely comforting. Because in a world this cold, this hard, the idea that fate sometimes whispers not today is a warmth you didn't expect to find. And as you settle into sleep, the final beat of the drums still echoing softly in your ears, you wonder how many people saw mercy in that rope, and how many saw a second chance disguised as failure. There's a different kind of cold settling over the village now, not from the wind, but from the inside of homes, where eyes glance away and conversations stop mid-sentence. This isn't the cold of winter. It's the chill of domestic shame. Tonight, justice doesn't live in the square or on a platform. It lives between 2 people who once shared a bed. You follow the quiet ripple of murmurs to a longhouse where a man stands outside, arms crossed. He isn't guarding it. He's been locked out. His wife, normally seen stirring pots or exchanging gossip by the hearth, is the one who brought him to the thing. Her charge, marital cruelty. No, not abuse in the way we define it today. The word doesn't exist in their world yet. But the law, archaic and poetic, calls it cold bedding. He's been refusing her warmth. Publicly. Repeatedly. And in a society where marriage is both a contract and a duty that's a punishable offense. You think this must be a private matter? Surely no law would pry into the silence between 2 people under woolen blankets. But it does. Because in medieval Scandinavia, the line between public and private was thin. Very thin. One mainstream historical fact. In Iceland's Gragas law code, failure to fulfill marital duties, especially on the husband's part, could be grounds for public arbitration. A woman could bring her case before the thing and request separation fines or even exile in extreme cases. And yes, refusing intimacy counted. This isn't about lust. It's about honor, equity, and the social contract. The elders discuss the case like any other dispute. Witnesses speak. A neighbor mentions hearing shouting at night. Another recalls seeing the man sleep outside the longhouse more than once. The wife remains silent but stands tall. Then comes the verdict: he shall not return to the bed until he earns it back. The punishment: the cold bed. Literally, he must sleep on a wooden board outside the longhouse for 7 nights, wrapped in nothing but a linen shift. He must light his own fire, cook his own meals, and wear a headband made of braided straw, a symbol of hollow vows. If his wife deems his efforts sincere, after the 7th night, he may return. If not, a trial separation follows with property split and social status adjusted. You're stunned. It sounds progressive, even modern. But don't mistake it for equality. In most cases, only men were punished this way. A woman accused of marital negligence might face different consequences, often social, sometimes symbolic, occasionally cruel. Quirky tidbit. In parts of rural Denmark, a husband who accused his wife of coldness had to prove it by planting a marriage root, a carved wooden pole in front of their home. If neighbors saw it and agreed, he had reason she'd be required to serve him meals from outside the door for a week without speaking. Passive aggression as medieval law. But back to our shivering friend. By the 3rd night, the cold is unforgiving. You see him trying to start a fire with flint and frozen fingers. No one helps. That's part of the sentence. Children giggle when they see the straw band on his head. One asks if he's pretending to be a scarecrow. He says nothing. But every evening he leaves a gift at the threshold: a carved wooden spoon, a scrap of wool, a bundle of herbs. By the 6th night, his fire burns steady. By the 7th, he sings softly a song she used to hum when washing clothes. And on the morning of the 8th day, she opens the door. She doesn't speak, just sets down a second bowl of stew beside his. That's the signal. Redemption in this world often arrives without words. You think about the subtleties of this punishment, how it doesn't rely on pain or spectacle, how it leans on reflection, patience, and humility. Historians still argue whether cold bed sentences were common or just poetic exceptions handed down through oral lore. Some suggest they served more as community theater than legal precedent justice, as performed intimacy repair. But what's undeniable is this: the law reached into places most modern laws fear to tread, into homes, into hearts, into the quiet places where people break. And yet, somehow, it did so without cruelty. It asked, have you kept your promises, not just to the gods or the land, but to each other? Later that night, you see them both sitting by the hearth. No ceremony. Just a shared bowl, a few mumbled words, and the absence of frost between them. You realize something important then. In a land where justice is harsh and ice-blooded, the laws around love flawed, as they are carry a peculiar warmth. They don't demand passion, but they demand presence. They say if you make a vow, sleep beside it, feed it, speak to it, or prepare to meet the judgment of the cold. And just like that, the frost outside feels a little less biting. You don't think there's anything left in this village that can surprise you. You've seen noses, cut tongues, removed men, sewn into bears, and husbands banished from bed. But just when you start to feel comfortable, the laws get weird. Tonight, a woman sits at the center of the square, surrounded not by judges or armed villagers, but by confused faces. Children whisper, elders squint. Her crime: she claimed her neighbor stole her dream. Yes, a dream. Not a pig, not a basket of fish. A dream, she says, revealed where she had hidden her late husband's good luck ring. And the neighbors, she swears, crept into her sleep and took it only to find and steal the ring in waking life. You scoff at first. Surely this is some sort of misunderstanding, or maybe grief. But no, this is serious. The village has paused its chores. Even the blacksmith's hammer is silent. This is where the law gets peculiar. Not just in what's punished, but why. Because sometimes in medieval Scandinavian justice belief carried the same weight as fact. Historians still argue whether such cases were formally prosecuted or simply mediated by the thing as social disputes. The written codes don't mention dream theft, but sagas folklore. They're full of them. In one Icelandic tale, a man dreams of a treasure beneath a tree and wakes to find his neighbor already digging. Coincidence? Maybe. But the village declared it spiritual theft, and the neighbor had to give up half the treasure and sleep outside for 9 nights under the stars as restitution. Tonight, the woman insists her dream was invaded. She accuses the neighbor of practicing hugstella mind stealing, a fringe but very real fear in Scandinavian culture. The belief that some people could slip into your mind while you slept and borrow thoughts, steal images, even implant desires. You might roll your eyes, but no one here does. Because belief like this doesn't just affect individuals. It disrupts trust, makes people question their neighbors, undermines communal harmony. The law speaker listens patiently. He doesn't scoff, doesn't wave her off. Instead, he asks a question so strange, it might as well be a spell. Can you dream it again? She nods. They give her a straw mattress, a bowl of warm milk, and silence. She lies down right there in the village square and tries to sleep. Yes, this is happening. While she rests, the neighbor she accused is given a pouch of stones and told to count them backward. A charm, a ritual, something to undo the supposed dream intrusion. It's part theater, part superstition, part law. And in this place, that mix works. Quirky detail. In northern Sweden, people used to hang a dream shield, a woven charm, above the bed of someone who had accused another of dream tampering. If the accused came too close while they slept, the shield would supposedly unravel, exposing their guilt. Sometimes it was just thread. Other times it included feathers, bones, or even dried fish eyes. You know, for style, you stay and watch. The woman eventually wakes. No scream, no gasp, just a long exhale. She stands, looks directly at her neighbor, and says, "The dream is returned. No punishment is given, no fine, no exile." Instead, the neighbor is required to help her rebury the ring she claims was stolen. Together, with witnesses. Symbolic, absolutely. But it restores balance. Because even if the crime wasn't real in your world, it's real here. And justice doesn't need to be scientific. It needs to settle hearts, not just debts. Mainstream historical fact. While laws around property and violence were rigid, Scandinavian communities left wide room for interpretation in cases of spiritual disruption. Witchcraft, dreams, omens, and shape-shifting were all referenced in oral traditions. And while not all resulted in punishments, they were discussed, mediated, and taken seriously by the community. Later, someone tells you about another strange punishment, a man once accused of sneezing during a funeral, in a way that was interpreted as disrespect. He was forced to mimic the funeral rites, using a turnip as the corpse, and chant the entire eulogy backward, 3 times, in the rain. Because here, even gesture is law. And while your mind spins with these bizarre poetic rulings, something becomes clear. In this land, the strange is not dismissed. The peculiar is not laughed off. Instead, it's brought into the fold, given structure, given voice. Justice is allowed to be weird because people are weird. And any system that pretends otherwise is lying to itself. You return to your corner of the longhouse that night, watching candlelight dance on the wooden beams, and wonder what dream you'll have, and whether it belongs to you Just to be safe, you tuck a rock under your pillow. Apparently, it keeps the thoughts of others out. The wind tonight isn't biting. It's whispering. You walk slowly through the village for what might be the last time, boots trailing through soft snow, the sound muffled like even the land is holding its breath. The square is quiet. No shouts, no jingling bell hats, no drums, just the low hum of life at rest. But the law, it never sleeps. And tonight you feel its presence not in spectacle, but in echoes. Because what lingers here is not just a history of peculiar punishments, but a legacy. The long shadow of law stretching from ice-clad past to uncertain future. You pause at the old standing stones of the Thing Assembly. There's no one here now, but you remember the voices. The bones passed hand to hand. The judgments carved into silence. You can almost hear them echoes of rules whispered into snowflakes. Here's the thing, most people forget these punishments weren't isolated weirdness. They were the bones of order, the framework that allowed communities to survive. In a land where nature already punished the careless and chaos was one bad winter away. One mainstream historical truth. Much of Scandinavian law became the basis for modern systems in Iceland and parts of Northern Europe. The Althing of Iceland, for example, is one of the oldest parliamentary institutions still in existence. But its roots lie in these frostbitten gatherings where shame, exile, and bare suits were the price of social equilibrium. The villagers may not remember every rune or ruling, but the principles, they endure. Even now in the way people pause before speaking, the way neighbors offer help but also hold memory, the way no one, not even the chieftain, walks fully above suspicion. Quirky tidbit. In some modern Icelandic towns, informal public shaming rituals still echo these old practices. A man who fails to shovel his walkway in time might find a cartoon of himself tacked on a public board. A woman who gossips too harshly might get her name rhymed in an unflattering poem at the winter festival. No harm, no law, just tradition carrying whispers of the past. Even language remembers. In Swedish, the word lagom means just the right amount. Not too much, not too little, balanced. And while it sounds like a lifestyle hashtag today, its roots may lie in ancient communal justice, the idea that law should restore, not just punish. You walk past the house where the man once wore the bell hat. He's inside now laughing over a stew. His shame became a joke, his debt repaid. But he'll never forget the bells, nor will the village. You pass the forge where the branding iron was heated. It hangs now like a relic, unused for years. But no one dares melt it down. You find yourself near the tree line again, the path where the outlaw walked into the wild. You wonder if he ever came back, if he ever stood at the edge of this world and chose to return. Because that's the final truth of this place. The law doesn't end with punishment. It ends with memory. A man marked with shame carries it into his children's names. A woman who lost her tongue becomes a cautionary tale. A duel fought with honor becomes saga. A dream trial becomes a bedtime story whispered beside the hearth. Historians still debate whether these laws were truly just, whether fear kept peace or if tradition wore too tight a collar around freedom. But what they don't debate is how resilient these systems were, how they endured, how they shaped identity, not just in Norway or Sweden or Iceland, but in every icy breath of northern justice that followed. And as you return to the longhouse one final time, villagers closing doors, fires, dimming low, you feel something shift, not an ending, just a closing of a circle. A deep, ancient rhythm coming to rest until the next dispute, the next question, the next whispered accusation that stirs it back to life. Because the law here isn't a scroll. It's a story, told in blood and laughter, in frostbite and forgiveness, in bone and breath and silence. And tonight, you were part of it. So now as the snow settles and the night deepens, your journey through the cold justice of medieval Scandinavia draws to a gentle close. The gallows creak no longer. The rivers freeze in stillness. The drumbeat of judgment has faded into the hush of sleeping homes, and all that remains is the soft hum of firelight behind wooden walls. You've walked the icy paths of punishment. You've heard the bells of shame, smelled the smoke of branding irons, and watched as law took strange, winding shapes, sometimes cruel, sometimes wise, always deeply human. And as you settle into your own quiet space, wherever in the world you may be, let the echoes of that snowy village rest softly around you. The strange laws you've witnessed weren't just about control, they were about survival, belonging, balance. Maybe you carry questions with you now. About fairness, about how we punish, about how belief and fear shape what we think justice should be. Good. Questions are what keep the story alive. So close your eyes now. Let the crackling fire in your mind's hearth warm you. Let the memory of that dream trial or that bearskin dance drift into the background. Let your breath slow. Let your heartbeat soften. You are safe here. The laws of this land can no longer reach you. Just snowflakes now, and quiet, and rest. And if you dream tonight, may no one steal it. Sweet dreams.